Hi guys, we got a special show for you tonight. We got Cody Leach, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Just start of another week, another long week, probably.
If anyone doesn't know Cody, because this obviously is a music channel, but
Mhm.
I'm a regular viewer of Cody's channel. He's the, for me, man, not just because you're on the show,
Mhm.
easily the best movie review channel on YouTube for me.
I appreciate it.
No, honestly, I'll leave a link for anyone who, because not everyone subscribes to every channel, do they? But I'll leave a link underneath, and you can subscribe to Cody's channel. And what I like about you, man, there's no bullshit.
Hmm.
I said to you before, come on as well. Most of the time, you agree. I agree with your what film you like and what you don't like, and I'm pretty honed in on that shit. And mainly, you're a metal fan,
Oh
a
yeah.
rock and metal fan. So, I mean, I remember like it was like I saw your intro and it was heavy, and I was like, yeah, fucking hell, this is a bit of me. And then I saw the odd Iron Maiden T-shirt, and I was like, oh yeah, here we go. This is what I like it. So,
My people.
yeah, exactly. It's like when two people with metal shirts meet in the street, and they're like, oh man, what the fuck? So no, it's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And congratulations on the success of the channel. Amazing
Thank you.
stuff. I mean, and I can see it because I mean, you're at the front of my YouTube. When you're at the top, when you subscribe to channels, you're on the
Hmm.
left hand side, so you're most watched for me. But I noticed how it's growing very quickly. I can
Yeah, it's
see
been
that.
going well. I mean, it was a slow and steady growth for a little over 5 years, and then I decided to go full time, and I was nervous if that was going to be a good decision or not. But luckily, knock on wood, the first 2 years so far has been really good. So, keeping the pedal down, and we'll see how far we can take it.
I think, man, at the end of the day, I think the honesty part of it probably shines through in the end, and that's probably why to grow and grow. Just if you stick to what
Hmm.
you're doing, what you're good at. So that's cool. So I mean, I could talk to you about movies all day as well. I mean, I am a big movie fan, obviously, but we're here to talk about music, so a bit of a change for you.
Hmm.
Um, and we're going to talk about the 10 albums, if you like. So I've given you a little bit of a task here, mate,
Hmm.
a couple of weeks ago to say, like, the 10 albums that shaped your taste in music, if you like.
Yep.
Um, so that's really cool. So I've done mine in year order from the oldest to the newest. I think you've done yours a little bit differently. Totally up to you, man. Are you all right to go first on this list?
Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah, so I kind of have mine listed in it's almost like a timeline of how my music taste was shaped. So some of these are a little bit out of release order. But I grew up in the 90s, and so I'm not ashamed to admit like my first real foray into music was stuff like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, that era. When I was young, that was the music.
Yeah.
And around the time that I was in like maybe second or third grade, I started to really get burnt out on that style of music just out of nowhere, just how popular it was and how it was just played everywhere. And so my dad had this like massive collection of music, always has, still does to this day. And I don't know if he was just listening to it in the car or what, but there was this CD called Alice Cooper Classics, which is essentially a greatest hits album. And he was playing it, and I really latched onto the song Love's a Loaded Gun, which is from his Hey Stupid album. And so I eventually that was the first album I kind of took out of my dad's collection and started playing on my own. And they had things like Poison and Feed My Frankenstein, um, House of Fire, Hey Stupid, School's Out. And so I really got crazy about that album in particular. And then suddenly, at the time, my dad didn't have too much else Alice Cooper. So I kind of forced him to start building out his Alice Cooper collection because I was such a nut for it. So he started getting all these different albums. It was my first concert in 2000. It was the Brutal Planet tour in the Stranahan Theater in Toledo, Ohio. And
Wow.
so that was the first album that kind of pushed me into the rock and metal area. The first album that really got me fixated on like an artist and their back catalog. And and I'm getting into Alice Cooper after he's been doing things for 20 something years at that point. So there's this whole catalog that I had to like go back and search and find all these different eras of Alice. And he was just getting into the Brutal Planet, Dragon Town, like the heavy era that he was in the early 2000s for a bit there. which kind of pushed me into what we're going to be talking about after Alice Cooper. But yeah, that was my gateway drug, if you will, into being kind of more of a rock and metal guy than the pop music of the 90s.
Very cool. I mean, I was, even though I'm older, I know I'm older than you, probably about,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm coming up to 50 fucking four this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you're a lot younger, but I mean, we do go back. I mean, I liked Alice Cooper, but I didn't go back, and I was an 80s kid, obviously growing up with music then. So
Mm-hmm.
Beat My Frankenstein was a big one for me. That Constrictor album, isn't it? That I really
Yes.
love that one. But I never went back. It's a bit weird. I'm not a very going back person when it comes to music.
Mm-hmm.
I latched onto the 80s, and then it's everything after then really. But a great one to start off with, man. It's cool to know how you found rock and metal. That is cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I found it from my brother, to tell you the truth. I mean, I was about probably 10, and then he started seeing his music, and he was a biker and all that. So I was like, yeah, got into it like that. But my first one is going way back, and I was only 3. So
Mm.
I did go back for this one, but my other brother, actually, I've got 2 brothers, and my middle brother is really into this band, and it shaped my taste for southern rock, if you like, because I love a bit of southern rock. And it was Lynyrd Skynyrd's debut album, Pronounced, which 1973, and it's like a album full of hits, basically.
Yeah.
Simple Man, Freebird, and Tuesday's Gone, and Gimme 3 Steps, and all the classic southern rock Skynyrd songs. And I just love Skynyrd now, especially like before the plane crash. Skynyrd, they were just so classic. Actually got to interview the now guitarist for Lynyrd Skynyrd, Ricky Medlock, like a few weeks ago, which was very cool. But
That's
yeah,
neat.
Pronounce Lynyrd Skynyrd is my first one. And it's difficult because I'm choosing these albums. I could have chose lots of albums in the same genre, and
Mm-hmm.
I thought, no, I've got to go back to the one that shaped my taste in southern rock. It's got to be Lynyrd Skynyrd. Pronounced is my first one.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's crazy how some of these bands have like that one album where it was just like
Yeah.
all these all-time hits just all in one recording session. It's just like what were you guys on when you recorded this? Like what did you tap into? Oh man. Yeah, that's a good one. So my second one is it wasn't too much later after Alice Cooper. I think it might have been after I had seen him live, and so that just juiced me up even more. And Judas Priest came out with this album called Demolition, and I think it was 2001, I believe, is when it came out. And this was part of the 2 albums that they did without Rob Halford. They had a guy named Tim Ripper Owens who kind of came in and took over. There's a movie called Rockstar with Mark Wahlberg that's based off of that story. And this was their second album. And, for whatever reason, Jugulator and Demolition are not really beloved by Judas Priest
No.
fans just because Rob Halford's in it. And I've always found it so unfair because they're such really good albums. And much like with Alice Cooper, this is kind of like the darker, heavier era of
Mm.
Judas Priest, who've always been heavy, but
Yeah.
this was like just a different tone. If you listen to these 2 albums, there's nothing else like it in the
No.
other Judas Priest catalogs. So I remember very distinctly. It was my dad's best friend, me, and my best friend at the time, who was my dad's best friend's son. And we were driving to this thing in Toledo called the Rib Off, which is like this festival they would do in the summertime where a bunch of different restaurants would
Mm.
basically give their rib samplers out, and at the end, everybody would vote on which ones were the best. We used to go to it every single year. And we got into the car, and my dad was trying to find a parking space, and this song Devil Digger came on, and it's one of the heaviest songs on the album. And I remember just in the minute and a half it took for us to go from where we were to him finding a parking space, I was just like, what is this? This is awesome. And so that kind of like the whole rib off, I'm just like, what is that song? Like it just like corrupted my brain. And so this became the second album where like once he was kind of done listening to it, I just like peeled it away from his collection and started listening to it a lot as in my room on my own. Then I got into Jugulator. They did 2 live albums based off of this little era too, and that's what kind of got me into a lot of Judas Priest's previous hits.
Mm.
Most of which, especially the older one, I've always said that the Judas Priest is one of those bands that they always sound better live.
Oh yeah,
Most
yeah.
bands, I think there's they sound good live, but there's always some bit of quality that's lost from the studio recording. And Judas Priest is just 100% of the time not that. As great as
Yeah.
it is in the studio, it's just got a different energy live. So I started getting into all of their stuff, all the old stuff, and then not too long after that, they disbanded and
Yeah.
Rob Halford came back, and now we've had a whole other newer era
Mm.
with Rob Halford. So to this day, Judas Priest is probably in my top 3 bands of all time, just because of that one song, that one album.
That's cool, man. I mean, it's weird with the older. If you go right back, you're totally right about the bands, the older bands, especially if they were making music like early '80s. Some of the production levels weren't good, and you're totally right. You heard a
Mm-hmm.
live album, and it was the best version of that song. Just
Yes.
Judas Priest are a really good example of that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Making great music now as well. And by the way, you're totally right on the other thing as well. People just can't accept, especially someone like Rob Halford, and then the new singer comes in. It happens all the time. It don't even matter if the new singer's better.
Yeah.
Fans can't accept it, can they?
No, it's
It's fun.
crazy too, man. It's really crazy because, like, I would never say that he's like better than Rob Halford, but the guy's got range on the
Oh
level
yeah,
of
yeah.
Rob Halford, and he's done a ton of things since. And so it's just a shame, even years later, like now that Rob's been back for going on 2 decades now, it's like it's okay, guys. You can go back. It's okay to like those albums. Give him a shot. He's not there anymore, so you don't have to feel guilty.
Definitely, yeah. Great choice, man. Very classic band as well. I like that. Okay, so this one really shaped I would say, most of my '80s. What I grew up in the '80s, which was the melodic glam, I suppose, that sort of scene. It came
Hmm.
out of LA a lot, but even though this band started it all really, I think the hair metal scene, if you could call it the hair metal scene, whatever you would call it,
Hmm.
1978, and of course these are massive where you're from. Van Halen's self-titled album.
Hmm.
So, I mean, if I know there's glam before this, like a different sort of glam, T-Rex and Mark Bolan and all that, but I think
Yeah.
with Van Halen, I think they started it all that scene with the metal guitar gods and the hair and all that. And Van Halen's self-titled album has got to be, that was a massive part of me when I found them. Probably about 80, I reckon I found that album. Been out for a
Mm.
couple of years. I was very young in '78, obviously only 8 years old. So when I got that one, I was like, man, this band and the Eddie Van Halen just blew me away. I didn't even know that was a real thing when he was playing that guitar on there. That Eruption song, the minute and a half song, I thought that's some sort of computer doing. No, there's no way someone can play. And now it's funny. You see like a 5-year-old kid on YouTube
Yep.
can
Killing
play Eruption, and you're like, what the fuck is that all about? You know what I mean?
it.
But no, that's another one. The hits on that, I know it's a copy, but you really got me, Running with the Devil. All the big songs came off of that as well. Massive debut album for Van Halen. So yeah, 1978 self-titled album, Van Halen.
Yeah,
There you go.
that's a good one. I really got into Van Halen after I started playing guitar. I started playing when I was like 14. Never stuck with it, unfortunately, but I had a number of years there where I was really fixated on it, and
Mm.
that was an album, and especially Eruption, where it was just like even hearing it in 2005, probably when I first got into it, I was just like, damn, what is that? And just to think of what kind of an impact that had when that
Mm.
album came out, of just like this whole style of guitar playing that just
Yeah,
like reinvented the game
yeah,
in like a minute and a half. Like every
yeah,
guitarist heard that album was just like, man, I suck. Like, it's just it's wild. But yeah, they're really interesting because Van Halen, it's rock, and yet it's kind of like rock you can dance to. Like it's
oh
like
yeah,
it's a very specific. It's like its own subgenre in and of itself. So yeah, they've
yeah.
always had a really interesting flavor to them for sure.
Party
So
music, man. It's party music, isn't it? That's
there
what
you
it
go.
is. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
There you
definitely.
go. Yeah. So my next one, it kind of shaped my music taste in 2 different ways. So I was in junior high at this point, and one of my best friends in junior high was really getting into rock and metal at the same time too, and he was super fixated on Metallica. And I had known Metallica, obviously. I don't think there's a person on this planet that
Mm.
hasn't. This is back in like 2002, 2003. But I had only known like Enter Sandman and a couple of like the ones that I think everybody on Earth has heard at one point. And it was something about just him constantly talking about Metallica where I was like, okay, I better start familiarizing myself with this band so that I can at least have one conversation with this guy because he won't shut up about it. And so I started to get into some of their stuff, and so that's kind of how I got into Metallica. But then also this album specifically was the album that helped me learn guitar the most. And so that's another like a couple of years later reinforced even more how important the Black Album is to me.
Yeah,
And so this is one where you got Enter Sandman, you've got Holier Than Thou, Sad But True, um, The Unforgiven, Nothing Else Matters. It's probably their most popular album as far as widespread knowledge,
mm.
widespread acclaim.
Yeah,
But yeah, they I got crazy into them in junior high, trying to just have something to talk about with my friend, and so I like Master Puppets Black Album. This is when Saint Anger came out, so even that I tried to convince myself that I liked for about 6 months. Where I was like, it's just different. It's okay. And then finally came to the realization I was lying to myself. But then yeah, later on, a couple years later, when I'm playing guitar, the cool thing about the Black Album was that every little technique that I was trying to learn as a novice guitar player, there was a song on this album that helped me learn that. So I would like try to learn one of the slower songs, like The Unforgiven, and then I would hit like a blockade where like my skill level's not there yet to get to the verse. And then I would go and I would try to learn Nothing Else Matters, and that would teach me how to do alternate picking. And then I would get to a point where I couldn't quite get past this part, so then I would go to Enter Sandman. And so I kind of bounced around different sections of these different songs in this album until I was able to play, with the exception of the solos, almost the whole album.
mm.
And so it was really a big one for me, of just being something that it not only shaped my music taste, but actually helped me learn music.
Yeah. When did you say you've heard that album the first time? What year was that around?
I mean, start to finish, it was probably 2002. I had heard Enter Sandman and The Unforgiven and Nothing Else Matters, of course. I
Mm.
mean, those are the three. As much as I love the album, like those are three songs I could go the rest of my life and never hear again, because those are, if you hear a Metallica song on the radio, 90% chance it's one of those three.
Yeah.
But yeah, every other song on the album, the first time that I heard it was, yeah, I was 12.
Yeah, it's got to be Enter Sandman and Sad But True for me. Like you said, there's a few songs that I loved when they came out, and no, never again,
Yeah.
never again. But I mean, I asked you when you found that album because I've got to say, when that came out in '91 ish,
Hmm.
it was one of the best, and it still is. It stands up as one of the best sounding albums ever as well. There's a huge sound to that album. I mean,
Yeah.
it's such a man. I was like blown away. I couldn't stop listening to that album either.
Hmm.
Brilliant, brilliant
Yeah,
album.
there was a funny story too about this one that I'll tell really briefly. So there was an era there in the early 2000s where me and my dad got really into making our own mix CDs back when that was a thing.
Mm.
Is where we would, get into a band, and then suddenly we would make our own little compilation albums, and I would design the album covers and stuff like that. So like it was a big bonding thing. And this is how bad my dad's sixth sense was, as far as always busting me if I did something I wasn't supposed to. So my friend that I was talking about got me into Metallica. He didn't actually have a hard copy of Black Album, and he wanted to copy it. So one day at school, I was like, I'll bring it to you. So I didn't ask my dad. I didn't tell him I was taking it. I was just like, I'll get away with this. He doesn't even listen to Metallica right now. And so I took the Black Album, dropped it off to my friend on Friday, went home. On Saturday, for no reason whatsoever, completely out of the blue, my dad comes in the living room. He's like, I'm gonna make a Metallica mixed album. And I was like, what? And so we're sitting there, and I'm literally in the computer putting in all these things. And I said, Black Album's such a good album that you play it by yourself. Like, let's not even put that on the mix. And he's like, are you crazy? Of course I'm putting it on there. And I was like, I made a
Busted.
mistake. I need to tell you something. So yeah. So that was always a funny story for me where I got like a dozen of those where it's just like, dude, did you just have like a premonition when you were sleeping that I did something I wasn't supposed to? Because this is bullshit.
It's cool actually, man, because I hear you talk about your dad a
Hmm.
lot on your channel. So man, there's a lot you got in common, movies and music. That's very cool indeed. Very
Yeah.
cool. No, great choice, man. Okay, so my third choice. It's only a year after the Van Halen album. And this band have always been a massive part of my life since I was a kid. And it's AC/DC, and it was the Highway to Hell album.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
the Bon Scott period was my favourite of AC/DC. I know that Brian Johnson is a massive part of AC/DC. I mean, I love Back in
Hmm.
Black, but just the raw edge they had
Yeah.
before there was just, man, I love Bon Scott's amazing, and the band they're just, I know they're one of these bands that people are like, they write the same song all the time, and I sort of get that. I don't think they were like that back then though. And this was, me and my mates were just totally into this at probably from about 1979 when it came out, probably to about 1982. We would play this album like as a pretend band, tennis rackets, hairbrushes. When I could actually, but and we would just do the whole album from beginning to end, from Highway to Hell to Night Prowler, all the way through, and we just
Hmm.
knew it by heart, and it was a massive part. And there's so many bands now as well that I love that take some AC/DC influence as well. Whether
Oh
it's
yeah.
do you know what I mean? There's so many of them, but no one could ever quite do it like they did as well. So AC/DC, massive, massive part of my life, AC/DC. So real and again, rock and roll band. It's just a rock and roll band,
Oh
really.
yeah. Pure rock and roll. They're like the best or the most famous garage band of all time, and they've never
Oh
really
yeah,
lost that essence.
yeah.
They have a certain simplicity to how they do their music that always has like this edge to it. Like the
Oh yeah.
drums specifically. I remember I pointed out to my dad one time how simple the drums are in every song, but it fits. It's like you don't need to complicate it. So yeah, I'm a big AC/DC fan too. Um, so the next one for me, unfortunately, was a band that I got into after they were, at least at the time, kind of dead and gone. And this was Creed. The pretty popular whenever I was a kid. Like they were kind of the biggest rock group of the time, but I just wasn't into rock to
Mm.
appreciate them in their heyday. So this is when I was fully into playing guitar. So I was probably 14, maybe even 15 at the time. And this is another one of those albums that really helped me as far as like developing my skill. So it was Human Clay, which is their second album, probably their most popular one. So this is the one with Higher, with Arms Wide Open, What If, a number of their more popular songs. And I don't remember specifically what got me into it because like my dad had their CDs but never listened to them. They were far past the time when anybody was even talking about them because they had been broken up for a number of years. But for some reason, I don't know if I just came across a list of songs that are easy to play or something like that. Something got me into Human Clay, and it was the song What If specifically was the
Mm.
first song that I ever played start to finish with no issues. And I was just like, like I did it. I made it. And so that was something that was big for me, but it also just really got me into their music like at a time where they weren't the popular thing to jump on the bandwagon for. It
Mm.
was like I just discovered them on their own merits. And so I really became a big fan of this album, became maybe even a bigger fan of Weathered, which was their third album. And then much like I talked about with Alice Cooper, I kind of like peer pressured my dad into buying their first album, My Own Prison, because he didn't have it. So even more so with that one. And so those three albums kind of became like a regular rotation for me. Mark Tremonti to this day is still my favorite guitar player,
Oh
and
man, yeah.
he's great in Creed. I always thought he was very underrated with his work in Creed, but even more so with Alter Bridge.
Mm.
If there's anybody watching this that still has not given Alter Bridge a chance because they're Creed with a different singer, that's no.
But you just, I
Your
mean,
brain.
I must have said that a fucking million times on my channel, man.
Mhm.
But it's funny how you said like you found them after they were popular because that probably half the reason why people don't like them is because they were so popular, wasn't it? But you found them
Yes.
after that. So
Yes.
I mean, they take so much stick, don't they now? Just
Yeah,
like
I mean,
Nickelback and stuff like that, isn't it?
yeah, and Creed, I think a lot of it came from Scott Stapp. It was his
Mm,
kind of his behavior at the time,
yeah,
his tendency to put faith-based lyrics in the songs when very clearly he was not like living the life of a faith-based person. So I think that kind of rubbed people the wrong way. Even the band members themselves are on record saying like we never understood like why there was so much, Christian imagery in our music. We
mm,
were never a Christian band, so they always kind
mm.
of had to fight that stigma. And luckily, they just got back together, and I have tickets to see them in July.
Oh
But they just
wow,
played their first show on their little cruise, and so I would be shocked if they don't have a new album within the next year that's at
yeah.
least announced. So we'll see what the new era of Creed looks like. But yeah, they're just a massive fan of what they did. I really like Scott Stapp's vocals. I know as a person, he was a little maybe insufferable for a while there. I'm glad that he seems to be healthy and clean now.
Mm.
Um, and then they led me to another album that was very, very important to me that we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, that was a big one, mostly just because of my guitar journey. This was just an album where I was just like, okay, I'm starting to understand this. I'm starting to actually be able to play songs. It's cool.
Brilliant choice, man. I don't, you probably know anyway, but looks like Creed are bringing out, like you said, they probably will because they won't be able to resist it, bringing some new material out. But I don't know if you know Scott Stapp brought an album out this year as well that he's
Yeah.
really good. Have you heard it?
I haven't had a chance to hear it yet, but I liked a number of his other
Mm.
solo albums because he came
Yeah,
out with solo album, I think the same exact year that Alter Bridge debuted. So it was almost like a unofficial battle
yeah.
between those two.
But it's really good, man. You like it. You really like some real heavy stuff and some really cool like ballads as well. So no, great choice, man. Another person as well. People won't give a chance to just because it's Scott Stapp. So they're like, no, they won't
Yeah.
even bother listening. So very cool, man. Okay, so I was 10 when this next album came out. Um, so it's a Black Sabbath album,
Ah, okay.
and you know what? I didn't mind them, but I was never a massive Ozzy fan. So when my favourite singer joined Sabbath, which was Ronnie James Dio,
Mm,
it just blew my mind. And that their album, the first album with him, what's to say, Highway to Hell. There's a lot of hell was in this, Heaven and Hell.
hmm
Um, I was just blown away. This little guy that could just power such a powerful voice.
Yeah.
And he sort of brought this totally different like feel to the band. It's got this magical. You'd sing about dragons and rainbows and all that. All of a sudden, it was a completely different band, but such an epic sound they had. And obviously, like from then on, I mean, I didn't even know about he was in Rainbow. I was too young to know about all that. And then I went back and listened to that and all of the albums that he made with Dio afterwards, his band, and I just became a massive fan of Ronnie James Dio himself. And Heaven and Hell is just the pinnacle of Ronnie James Dio, just amazing. So Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell,
Yeah,
brilliant.
that's an interesting one we were talking about with Judas Priest, where fans don't like to accept change.
Yeah,
That even having what most people, I would say, I'll go out on a limb and say most people would say greatest metal vocalist of all time, Ronnie James Dio, he
yeah,
comes into Black Sabbath and he's unwelcome. Like it's
yeah,
weird. Like I get that the Ozzy era of Black Sabbath was very, groundbreaking, things like Paranoid and Iron Man or whatever, but I don't think there's any question that the vocal range, the vocal quality of Ronnie James Dio is just like light years ahead of what Ozzy's capabilities are. And I love Ozzy. So yeah, that's another interesting one where those couple of albums that they did with Ronnie are like super fan favorites for like a niche group of
mm.
Black Sabbath, and then they're like the albums that we shall not speak of for some others, even though it's Dio. But yeah, that's a good one. There's a number of bands that I find myself on this weird little thing where like the era that they had somebody else in there is my favorite era, whether it's Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, even
Yeah.
Anthrax, where I'm a big John Bush fan, and I every single one of those eras, anytime I talk about it, there's always somebody's like, nope, we don't acknowledge those. I'm like, okay, whatever, man.
And
Uh,
it's albums as well. Even if
mm,
if a band got a discography and everyone knows that that's the classic album. If you found the band on that particular album years on, that could just be your favorite album because you found the band then.
Yeah.
So, like I say, it's all subjective, isn't it? But I've got a funny story about someone who went to see, because it ain't like the internet now. You don't know as soon as a singer leaves and another one joins. You didn't know back then.
Yeah.
So I've got an older friend who went to see Black Sabbath thinking he was going to see Ozzy on the Heaven and Hell tour. and this little Ronnie James Dio stepped out singing these Sabbath songs. He hated it, and he hated Ronnie James Dio. Probably because of taking over from, especially expecting to see Ozzy, and then someone else comes out. So
yeah, I can understand that to a degree, I guess. But yeah, I'm with you though. That's one of the best, if not the best, Black Sabbath albums. So I'm cut from the same cloth on that one.
Good.
There we go. So the next one for me is going to be an album called Faceless by Godsmack, who, continuing on the trend of talking about bands that people love to hate on. So the Black Album, Human Clay, and Faceless were all kind of in that short little chunk there where I'm learning guitar, and these albums that kind of helped shape my skill set became very important to me. And Godsmack, just like Creed, obviously I knew about them. They were very popular for a number of years. Heard a couple of songs like, everybody knew Voodoo, a couple of these other ones that were always getting radio play, but I never really took the time to actually listen. And it was something about that summer. This was the summer that I moved. I grew up in Ohio, which is northern United States. And my dad got remarried and moved us down to Georgia, which is the southern United States. And I was just such a fish out of water, didn't know anybody, different culture, everything, that entire summer when we moved before I started high school was just like the most isolated couple of months I think I've ever had in my life, where it was just like me in our rental house, like feeling like my world is gone. And so music really kind of filled that gap of like giving me purpose, I guess. So Godsmack was one of those bands where like I just discovered them. I think I was bored. I pulled the album off, and specifically Faceless was one where, again, like I started to play things like Serenity and I Stand Alone and Straight Out of Line, and learning. This is what helped me learn about kind of more the drop D or drop C tuning of guitars, which is what really took over in the 2000s during like the quote unquote new metal era. And so I just really grew to love that album specifically. Then I got into the previous two, which was the self-titled and Awake. And Awake's probably their heaviest album they've ever done. I remember when I put that song on, or the album on, and Sick of Life opens it up, which is like one of the heaviest songs they've ever done. I was like, where has this been all my life? This is awesome. And so it's always great whenever you get into a band and there's like a couple of albums that you can just go back and discover. You get like this whole meal that you can just devour. And they've since, remained one of my favorite bands of all time. I don't love some of their newer stuff near as much as their older stuff. Supposedly they're done recording albums. I don't know if I believe that or not, but they said that this last album was it. Now they're just going to do tours and maybe drop a couple of singles, but I've seen them live 3 times. They're an amazing band to see live. Huge respect for Sully, just with his approach to music. Even his self-titled, or not his self-titled, his solo stuff is very interesting, very different than Godsmack, which I at least appreciate. It's always weird to me when somebody does a solo album, they just do more music that they're already releasing with their main band. So yeah, they've always been one of my favorite bands, and that album right there specifically was one that was very important to me and still is. I wish that we would get an album that was more in that vein from them before they hang up the guitars.
And never believe a band when they say they're giving up either.
No, never.
We know
Nobody
that,
stuck to it. Even Slayer, they're like, never mind, we're coming back.
They're coming back. Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? No, great one, man. Thanks for that. Okay, well, this is really mellow. This is probably the mellowest one on my list.
Okay.
I mean, we are talking rock and metal. So, I mean, you could say this is rock. I don't know, but it definitely shaped my taste in AOR music, the more melodic side of rock. And it's not 1981 Journey.
Okay. Yeah, they're rock for sure.
Yeah, they are. They can be. And it's the album Escape. It's basically when they turn this corner of they had this different sort of sound. They were a very different band way back, and then Steve Perry joined them, and then a couple of albums in, they sort of hit this very mellow, very commercial, if you like, and then they blew up, didn't they? Especially in America,
Yeah.
massive band Journey, and Escape. Again, it's I can't. It's another song. If we talk about songs I can't listen to, it's got to be "Don't Stop Believing." It's the start of the album. I
Yeah.
loved it back then, but man, I really can't listen to that anymore. But there's plenty more to find on this album, and it's there's loads of ballads, but I think they're maybe the best band to do a ballad on. They're just write some amazing songs, and when they get heavy, they can get heavy as well. Neil Schon, he's a great guitarist.
Hmm.
And yeah, Journey have been a massive staple of my again since I found them early on. It was a bit weird in England, you can imagine I was like growing up, and around that time, especially 81, the new wave of British heavy metal was kicking in with Saxon and Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. And you had your like denim jacket on and your badges and your studs and all that. I even had a bullet belt, I mean, I looked really cool. And then like Journey was like almost like I would just go home and play it and not tell anyone, and just these piano ballads.
Yeah.
But love them to this day, man. Journey. Yeah, Escape was just an amazing part of my life, and I still love the album now.
It's wild how Steve Perry was easily like one of the best vocalists of all time, like one of the best voices, and then he just kind of just stopped. They had their era, and then he just kind of went away and did his own thing. And they've had a number of singers jump in since. Supposedly the guy they're with right now, didn't they find him like a Star Search or something like that? There was some interesting story, but supposedly he's amazing. But specifically, it's interesting how Steve Perry was like, people would vote him as like the best vocalist or one of the best vocalists of all time. They had all these hits, and then he just kind of stepped away. Once in a while, people do that. It's like Eddie Murphy with comedy. He's like, I'm done. Had my heyday. And you're just like, what? Come back. What are you doing?
I mean, they have had some amazing singers, and the one now can sing Journey songs just beautifully, And people, like we spoke earlier on, people still call for Steve Perry, and I've heard Steve Perry do some live appearances, and he had one of the best voices, and now I don't know how old he is, but he just hasn't got half the voice anymore. People still say, bring him back, bring him back, bring him back, and you just think, just get over it, man. He's gone. Let the band carry on if they want to carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, Journey's they're kind of their own little style there, where if you're in the mood for that, there's nobody that can fill that void better than Journey.
Yeah, agreed.
So the next one for me is another greatest hits album that I got. I think it was for Christmas one year, and so this was maybe a year or so after the last couple of albums I've talked about, and it's called The Singles by the band Stained, which another band that I was aware of. Of course, I knew Outside, I knew It's Been a While, a couple of others, but I started to kind of really start to dive into a lot of these bands in this era where I'm just trying to find things to play on guitar and trying to like really dive into my music taste, and still in kind of that fish out of water phase where I don't really have new friends, or, I go to school, I come home, and then I'm in my own little world. And what was so interesting about this album was not only did it really make me a massive fan of Stained, which I still am to this day, but the last, I think, 4 songs on this album are acoustic covers that got me really into other bands. So you have singles on here like Outside and Epiphany and It's Been a While and So Far Away, and everything that was like the song that you needed to hear from, I don't know, 96 to 2006 that Stained had released. But the last 4 songs on this album was you had Sober, which is a 9 Inch Nails song, I believe. You had Nutshell, or not 9 Inch Nails, I'm sorry. It's I'm blanking here. Never mind. It's Sober. Somebody's going to correct me in the comment section. You talk long enough, your brain goes to mush. But the 2 more important ones, you had a live acoustic recording of Nutshell, which is an Alice in Chains song, and you had a live acoustic recording of Comfortably Numb, which was Pink Floyd. And both of those songs, like I think I got more attached to those than any of the other Stained songs on this album. And so it made me dive into Pink Floyd, and both of these songs, Nutshell and Comfortably Numb, to this day, I would say are in my top 5 songs of all time. And so Comfortably Numb was just incredible, even though, I'm not personally a drug user or anything like that. And that's basically what the song's about. It's still just such a beautiful song. I love the guitar solos on it. I think the second guitar solo in that song is probably my favorite one, period,
Mm.
of all time. And then Nutshell, another band, Alice in Chains, that I had known some of but hadn't really dove into yet. And something about Nutshell was just like,
Mm.
it was like this euphoric experience where I'm just like, what is this song? Like I've never heard it, but where is it? And my dad had Alice in Chains albums and I couldn't find it. And it's because it's on one of their EP albums.
Mm.
And so I had to, this is when like music pirating was really big. So sorry, gonna admit to some crimes here, but like I had to find it in a way that was not so legal. And when I finally was able to hear the studio recording of Alice in
Mm.
Chains Nutshell, it's one of the only like borderline out of body experiences I've had listening to music, where I had heard the acoustic version from Stained. I had heard the MTV Unplugged version, which is probably the most popular version of the song from Alice in Chains. But when I heard the studio version, there was something just like, again, like euphoric about it, that it was
Mm.
like knowing that Lane had already passed away. I heard his voice and the way that it was kind of mixed in with the song, and it was just like it had like this from beyond the grave kind of quality to it. I don't really know how to describe it. It's wild. But those 2 songs, for their own reason, was just this massive thing that came out of this. But to this day, Stained is one of my favorite bands. I've seen Aaron Lewis live 3 times. I've seen Stained live 3 times. Most recently, just a week ago at Earth Day Birthday in Orlando, and to this day, they're just a band that I love what they do. They're heavy. I love his voice. Some of it might be a little dark and depressing, where you kind of don't want to listen to too much Stained back to back because it'll put you in a dark mood. But I just love what they do. So of the bands that kind of became popular in that little 2000s era, they're probably the one that
Mm.
I've maintained the most fandom for.
Very cool. And to tell you what, that album and the way you found other stuff from that
Hmm.
album really sums up what this show is about, really.
Hmm.
Shaping your taste in music. The amount of stuff you've spoken about already that you found because of an album, then you've moved on to other things is
Hmm.
yeah, that's a big one. Thanks for that, mate. Much appreciated.
Hmm. Oh, Tool. Sober is a Tool song. There we go.
Yes.
Ah, I beat you, comment section.
Oh God, yeah. Don't upset Tool fans. You should know better than that.
No, no. As soon as I said 9 Inch Nails, it's just like 25 comments. What?
Brilliant. Okay, well, this one is probably known as one of the best heavy metal albums ever recorded. So 1982, imagine I'm 12 years old. I liked Iron Maiden already. I liked Iron Maiden, but then I loved them when Bruce Dickinson joined a Number of the Beast.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought, what the fuck is this singer? I mean, what? And then they almost bought this. They showed a live. They did like a live. I think it's live at Hammersmith in England or something, where he sang he could do it live as well. And I was what? How can anyone do this? And Bruce Dickinson, that theatrical side he brought to Maiden, and all of a sudden they were this epic heavy metal band instead of this. I suppose you could call them a punky metal band beforehand. And he just brought a whole new meaning to the band. It's not my favourite Iron Maiden album,
Mm.
but I think it just basically opened up that side of, well, a load of bands now. Again, we spoke about AC/DC earlier on. The amount of bands I cover and say that sounds a bit like Maiden, or that guitar part is a very Maiden influenced,
Yeah.
and they just the world of heavy metal just turned on its head. I think in that album especially, and just opened up for the band, as you know, massive than that they are now as well. Even more popular than ever now.
Yeah. I almost saw them live. Well, I guess it would have been this year. I almost bought tickets last year, but they're currently doing, I think, Somewhere in Time. Like they're touring and playing that whole album. So I was like, the first time I see them live, I want it to be a mix, not just the whole, one album. So I kind of passed on that. I haven't seen them live yet. But yeah, with Iron Maiden, I think my favorite album of theirs, which I never hear anybody say, is Brave New World. I love Brave New World.
Good album, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good one. But yeah, they're an interesting band because they're like they're very distinctly heavy metal, but they're also like really progressive sometimes, and they're really melodic sometimes. Like, so they're another one of those bands that has such a distinct sound. They might as well be
Mm.
their own subgenre, which is
Oh
really
yeah.
interesting. But yeah, that's a great one too. So my next one is kind of following up on what I was just talking about with Stained, and it's Alice in Chains' Dirt. So that album, you know, aside from making me a massive Stained fan, it made me a fanatic of Alice in Chains. So I started to dive into their stuff, and I honestly can't decide, and so I might as well tie these. Like Dirt as well as Facelift to me are equally good. Most people say Dirt is their best album, or at least the most popular one, but like Facelift has so many good ones as well.
Mm.
Um, I'm not the biggest fan of the third album, the what they call Tripod, but nonetheless, these two albums specifically, Alice in Chains is very distinctly like the grunge era, but they're beyond grunge. Like they're almost like grunge metal, or their own, again, like their own subgenre in and of themselves. Like when I hear the grunge era and you think things like Nirvana, Stone Temple Pilots, Alice in Chains kind of is that, but really isn't. And so they were like this really unique thing there when that like Seattle era kind of came into prominence. And to this day, Lane Staley's my favorite vocalist.
Mm.
It sucks that he had his issues that he had and
Mm.
was taken way too soon. Because you just listen to some of his stuff, whether it's live recordings or you get people that can do like the isolated vocal tracks on some of
Oh
their
yeah.
original recordings, and it's just like, dude, like this guy's voice was just on another level. Um, but yeah, there's just something about very similar to Stained. I guess this is my depressing music era where a lot of their stuff is talking about drug use
Mm.
and you know, Junkhead and Sick Man, and you can get into things like Rooster, and it's
Mm.
about, you know, the Vietnam War and his father, and I just loved the variety of music that you can get from those two albums, where some of it's really heavy and
Mm.
you're like, yeah, and you get charged. The other stuff is like really moody, almost like early Black Sabbath stuff, like
Mm.
Doom. And some of it's really melodic, like Down in a Hole, which is still kind of depressing. But at the same time, it's just I just love their style, and I've tried desperately to get into some of their newer stuff. I thought Black Gives Way to Blue
Mm.
was a great like return,
Yeah.
and I thought William Duvall did a pretty good job, even though it was very clear that Jerry Cantrell was kind of taking over as main vocalist, and
Yeah.
he was just kind of
Yeah.
mixing William Duvall in there. Haven't loved the other two albums they've come out with. So I mean, it
Mm.
is what it is when your singer dies and it's somebody
Yeah.
with the legacy of Lane Staley. You can only do so much.
Yeah.
But they're another band that I would love to see live at some point, and I really wish, like, if I have a music regret, it's that I didn't get into them sooner and I didn't see them live when Lane was still alive.
Yeah. Massive part of my life again, mate.
Hmm.
Alice in Chains, and I think, you know, I really got into the grunge Seattle scene back then. Pearl Jam and them other bands you mentioned.
Hmm.
But I think out of all their bands, they're the band that, you know, I listen to now.
Yes.
I don't listen to Pearl Jam. I went off Nirvana quite quick.
Yes.
Stone Temple Pilots, don't listen to them any, but Soundgarden were good as well. But
Hmm.
man, Alice in Chains are the band.
Hmm.
They are the band, and you're totally right. They're a metal band that was just come from Seattle, and they were just, you know, lumped into that scene. And of course, lyrically, you know, like you said, the drug use and all that. Um, there's a couple of great stories come out of that actually. That I think it was an interview with Jerry Cantrell and someone else, and someone said it was really weird. He was so powerful, Jerry Cantrell, sorry, Lane Staley's vocals. But most people, if you're standing next to them, you hear the vocal come out, you know, from their mouth. But it's almost like his whole body was like an amplifier. It was so he didn't even need a fucking microphone, basically.
Hmm.
I reckon he's such a powerful vocal. Yeah, just an amazing vocalist, and sorely missed again. Um,
Absolutely.
and I reckon, I don't know if you know this, is that's like a mini concept album, Dirt. It's almost like from the, apparently, it's said, I think it's Jerry Cantrell said, from Rooster right through to Angry Chair. It's like the journey of the Vietnam War and coming out of there, and then the journey on drugs and all that. And I think it's like a mini concept within the album, which it makes sense when you listen to it. It's like it's downhill and just reaches rock bottom with Angry Chair. But yeah, very, like you said, you got to be in the mood. Well, you haven't got to be in the mood for it. Us metal fans, we like that.
Yeah, we do. It's just like with horror fans. It's like, no, I live in darkness.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. Great choice, mate. Brilliant choice. Okay, well, you've mentioned this band already. It's been in your list, but a different album. So my favorite year of metal was 1986. So I think that there's so many great albums that came out that year. It's my favorite year in metal. And this band, this is their third album in, and it's Metallica, and it's probably the obvious one. A lot of people choose it as their favorite album, but it really hit big for me. It's Master of Puppets.
Yeah.
Just the perfect album for me. I did a show once about, perfect albums or albums that you couldn't live without or something like that. And I just think from beginning to end, this is the perfect Metallica album. And, after this, it's just, man, it's just so heavy. But it's so epic at the same time and beautiful. There's some sections in this that are so beautiful, and they were at their heaviest at other times as well. And just the perfect songwriting. Love everything about it. I actually like the deeper cuts a little bit more on this than Master of Puppets is a very good, cool song. But there's some deeper cuts. I mean, I love every song on it. It's just perfect from beginning to end. But Master of Puppets is my seventh choice, actually. We're up to number 7, so
yeah, that has since become my favorite Metallica album, if only just because most of Black Album is so overplayed that part of me fell out of love with it, where I'm just like, give the rest of their catalog a chance. But yeah, that's one that you're talking about, perfect albums, like an album that you can listen to from start to finish and not have any desire to skip a song. That's one of them for me.
Oh yeah.
So my next one, which kind of came from my my little exploration into the grunge era that Alice in Chains really put me into, and I didn't end up becoming a big fan of the grunge era, like kind of like what you said, like Nirvana I never really got into, Stone Temple Pilots, couple songs, never really got into. Pearl Jam I've never been a big fan of. Soundgarden and Alice in Chains were the only two where I was like, oh, this is good stuff, I'll listen to whole albums here. And as much as I really like Soundgarden, I loved Audio Slave even more. So Audio Slave, the self-titled album, is my next one. And this was one where I think they did 3 albums where you had Chris Cornell from Soundgarden team up with the entire band minus the singer of Rage Against the Machine. And you had something very different. And I don't really know what the popular view on Audio Slave is. I don't know if it's one of those things where people like call for the reunion of Rage Against the Machine and Soundgarden, and they don't like this little supergroup thing, but I just loved how their styles combined with Audio Slave. And with the self-titled album, you have things like Cochise, which is probably their more popular song. You hear it in a lot of movies. Show Me How to Live is awesome. Like a Stone's pretty popular. Shadow on the Sun is probably in my top favorite songs of all time. I just love that one. I love how it kicks in, but then it slows down. Like, it's just got a really cool vibe to it. I Am the Highway is a great one. This is another one of those albums that there's not many songs that I would want to skip through. And so it was something that just, it had its own little vibe to it that I really loved and latched onto at that time. And unfortunately, I got into it right as they kind of disbanded. So they had their 3 albums out. I loved this one. I went to the store, bought the second and the third album that are good, but not as good as the self-titled album. And then no more Audio Slave. And then unfortunately, Chris Cornell's passed away now, so there's no hope of them ever doing anything else. But that was a special little era there with those 2 artists where I like Soundgarden quite a bit. Rage Against the Machine's pretty decent. They're not completely my style of things, but when they came together, there was just something magical there for my taste. And this is a really good one for me.
Great choice, man. It really made sense as well. If you think about it, Rage Against the Machine, that they were a rap metal band, whatever you want to call them, but their riffs were very 70s Led Zeppelin, but heavier sort of riffs.
Yeah, like
so
funky
so it really made sense that Chris Cornell with this amazing voice, this classic metal voice and it really fitted well. It really worked out well. So you can, I didn't see it at first. I was like, what the fuck, what I mean? But
Yeah.
then it really worked well. So no, great choice, mate. Well, you have my next choice. You've actually chose this album, so we have matched. So it's Alice in Chains and Dirt. So, yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I mean it's just a massive part. We've both spoken about it already, but yeah, just a huge part of that Dirt album. I remember when I got it. I think I got it on CD because vinyl had just finished or was still going a little bit, but CDs were out and CDs were really exciting and it all sounded better on CD. And yeah, I just remember opening it up. I had the CD and it all opened up into one big. You could read the lyrics and yeah, man. I mean, very depressing, but like you said, metal fans. I mean, it sort of gripped you in this storyline of drugs and I mean, it was just a bit mad and it just the way it fitted in with that whole scene, that Seattle scene was it was easily the best band out of that era.
Yeah,
and like I said, I already liked Sabbath, so it was like almost like a darker Sabbath to me. And I think they were touring with a lot of the not normal metal bands, but the non-Seattle bands. They were touring with the the Metallicas and all that because they were just a metal band, really. But,
yeah, my dad often tells me a story where back when my mom was kind of around, my mom had her share of issues, just kind of a precursor to this story. They went to go see Metallica and Alice in Chains, which this is post Lane Staley passing away, so it was really just Jerry Cantrell kind of taking lead, which I mean, I would give a testicle to see that show. And so my dad always tells a story of like how awesome it was and how horrible it was because my mom was kind of getting into things and he was more focused on her than the actual show. But to think like Alice in Chains opening up for Metallica, like nowadays that would be like $1,000 a ticket. You know what I mean? That would be like this huge thing. But yeah, that would have been awesome to see them.
I actually saw. I've never seen Alice in Chains live. But I did. There was this little. Sometimes we do these little mini festivals over in this country. They're like on holiday parks sort of thing. And they did this. I don't know if you remember the magazine Kerrang. It's like a metal magazine.
Yeah.
And they did this weekend festival thing, and Jerry Cantrell was actually headlining one of the nights. Over in Little England, in this little campsite, and he was just on the stage. And he's actually the band that was going to be Alice in Chains because it was him singing lead, but he had William DuVall with him, and he's obviously brought some solo stuff out around about this time as well. So I've sort of seen them because it's the members, but they were actually Jerry Cantrell's band at the time. So they played a couple of Alice in Chains songs, and I was like, man. It was just amazing. So
gotcha. Yeah. Maybe that's who it was. Maybe it was Jerry Cantrell opening up for Metallica, but it was Alice in Chains in spirit.
Yes, of course. Where Jerry Cantrell was he's the main driving force behind that band anyway. We obviously miss Lane though. That's the only thing. Okay. What you got next, mate?
All right. So my next one is going to be Alter Bridge's second album titled Blackbird. And this is one where it's interesting. For as much as I've bitched about like fans being closed-minded about new eras and new things, for a short little sneeze, I was that way about Alter Bridge because I was a massive Creed fan by this point, and I had not heard of Alter Bridge until I was sitting. I want to say I was either a freshman or a sophomore in high school, and I'm sitting in my construction class. And I remember there was just some kids in front of me talking about this concert that had just went on the night previous, local to me, where it was Three Doors Down, Shine Down, who was just starting out, and Alter Bridge. And I was like, well, I know who those first two bands are, but who the hell is Alter Bridge? And somebody was like, oh yeah, it's like, they were just, I was just listening in, eavesdropping, and they're like, it's Creed with a different guitarist. Like they were fucking up the details. But regardless, I was like, Creed? What's going on? And so I started to research it on my own and found their debut album, One Day Remains, I think is what it's called, of Alter Bridge. And I liked it, but something about Miles Kennedy being the vocals, I was like, it's not the same without Scott Stapp, even though it's like, nowadays I love Scott, but like Miles Kennedy is just in another stratosphere. But something about it being different, I was like, no, So I kind of got to be that fan for a moment. But what I latched onto with that first album was how drastically Mark Tremonti's guitar playing had changed from Weathered to Alter Bridge's debut, where he's just shredding the whole album. And I was just like, what the hell? Where was that guy back in the 2000s? And so by the time Blackbird came out, I had come around to it a lot more. And Blackbird is the first album that's distinctly Alter Bridge, because the first album was basically all written by the band before they had a singer. So Miles Kennedy didn't really get a lot of creative input on it. He just kind of came in and was like a singer for hire, to put it in, the most basic way, in the first album. And it's still a very good album. I enjoy it very much, but Alter Bridge was the first time where you had the creative force of, Mark Tremonti and Scott Phillips and all them, and then Miles Kennedy coming together. And so Blackbird is this whole other animal from their first album. And I remember talking about albums that is just perfect from start to finish. I remember getting that album, being so excited for it, and I loved the bird cover. I have a tattoo on my arm of it. And playing that album, and from the opening track all the way through, was just like an album where I would get to the end of the first song and I would go back and I would listen to the first song again and listen to it like 8 times in a row before I even advanced to the second song. And then I would do it again. And it was me latching into the guitar parts more than anything, but even more so just like the different style and synergy that they had on this second album. And this became one that, I never ever got to the skill level to be able to do Mark Tremonti solos, or even some of his rhythm stuff is pretty wild. He does some really interesting little tunings. But this was an album where I was like almost challenging myself, like, I have to learn these riffs. These are so awesome. So this was like a big guitar album, as well as just a big album that just got me into this band and Miles Kennedy and everything. And it just kind of like, defined a little era of my life, where I think back to memories of that year or so that this album was like in constant rotation in my car, and it's almost like the soundtrack of my life for that year. So absolutely love this one. Alter Bridge to this day is still one of my favorite bands, and this was the album that really launched that for me.
Well, we've got an exact match at number 9 as well, man.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, man. I've seen Alter Bridge more than I've seen any other band.
Yeah.
So like, I didn't catch them on the first tour to England. I know they toured on One Day Remains. And then I went to see them on the Blackbird tour, and I saw them consistently every time they came back to England. So I suppose I've probably seen them about 8 or 9 times. I'm not I don't go to every gig. So I've moved away now to the bottom of the country, where no one comes to this side of the country anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of like Georgia in the US. Everybody just kind of skips over me, and I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah, I know. It's a fucking murder, I tell you. I have to travel and stay with someone like 5 hours away just to travel to London just to see a band. But yeah, Alter Bridge have been a massive part again of my life. And Blackbird isn't my favourite album by then. I actually love the next album more, which was AB3. I love AB3. I mean, to tell you the truth, the first 4 are just huge,
Yeah, agreed.
I think Blackbird, they definitely was a step up. And of course, the song Blackbird itself is such a epic track, isn't it?
Yes.
It's just mental. And I think the pinnacle of seeing this band, though, was the best gig I've ever been to. And I went to see him at the Royal Albert Hall with the orchestra.
Oh, okay. Was that the one that they recorded for that album?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Blu-ray and all that. And me and the missus were right near the front, a full orchestra, 72-piece orchestra or something. And I was just like, what the fuck is this all about?
Yeah, that's crazy, because that was a little trend that Metallica started there, and like it's cool. It had a novelty to it, but I was never really all that convinced that the orchestra really added to those songs. But when you listen to Alter Bridge, I think specifically Words Darker Than Their Wings, if I was going to call out one song in particular, where the orchestra feels like, I thought the song was perfect, but it was missing that, and now it's like on a whole other stratosphere. So that would have been awesome to see that live.
And that's just, what? Just before you mentioned it, I was going to say Words Darker Than the Wings. I think at that time, like, Miles Kennedy's obviously, I think he's about the same. He's nearly the same age as me. I think he's 50 something. And like if you was ever doubting his vocals, he did
Oh
that.
yeah.
He did the scream at the end, and I've never seen a standing ovation where they wouldn't even let the band play the next song. Literally, everyone stood up, and it just erupted. It was like fucking hell, hairs on the back. I'm thinking about it now, man. I'm just like the hairs are just going everywhere. But just an amazing experience. But Blackbird, yeah, I think they just found their feet then, didn't they? He's totally
Yep.
right with that album, and that's matched you on number 9. So that's cool, isn't
Awesome.
it?
Yeah. And AB3 is pretty interesting too, because that's an album
Mm,
where it's a long album. I think there's 14 songs on it.
yeah,
And that was one where I remember hearing them talk about it, and I was getting like excited about it, that they were like, we kept thinking we wanted to cut things for time or like maybe this, but like no, just put it all out there. Just a massive album. And it was they were kind of marketing as like their attempt at like a concept album because of some of the themes with it. And that's an album where there's something for everybody on that one.
yeah.
It's a little doomier, a little gloomier in
Mm,
spots. It's a little more high tempoed in spots. You get Words Darker Than Their Wings. That's kind of more melodic and more
mm,
ballady, but with edge. And it was cool because, as you said, with Mark Tremonti's vocals, that was the first time that we got to hear him just take the lead vocal for a bit. They kind of
yeah,
trade back and forth, having a conversation in the verse. And now I could speak for pretty much most, if not all, Alter Bridge fans. The albums where Mark Tremonti has a song where he takes lead vocals is always like a fan favorite because it's just such
yeah,
a cool thing to see a band with a
yeah.
singer on the caliber of Miles Kennedy actually like take a back seat for a song. Usually egos get in the way of that. And I've seen them live a couple of times, not nearly as much as you, but I've seen them live a couple of times. And whenever they transfer over to one of Mark's songs, it's always funny hearing Miles Kennedy introduce it. He's like, "This is my favorite part of the show because I don't have to do shit." He just, so it's always great. But yeah, I love Alter Bridge, and again, I'll repeat myself. If you are somebody that has not given them a shot because of the Creed stigma,
Mm,
just get over your bullshit. All right, they got like 6, 7 albums at this point. Give them a shot. So my last one is from a band called Stone Sour, and it's the album Audio Secrecy, which is not a fan favorite of this band, but I'll explain why it is such an important album for me. So this is Corey Taylor's band that he does outside of Slipknot. They're currently on hiatus, so I don't know if they're broken up. I don't even know specifically what the issue is, which is a shame because for an era there, they were kind of like my
mm,
favorite band. But he started Stone Sour before he even joined Slipknot. They had their debut album is one of the older ones, and they had Come Whatever May sometime in the 2000s whenever I was in high school, and I had heard of the band because I almost went to go see Disturbed, and they were the opening band. I didn't end up getting to go to that concert, but it stuck that name in my brain of Stone Sour. And when Audio Secrecy was coming out, I was actually a lot of my favorite albums of all time like define this little era in my life, almost like a little story. So there was a point where I had dropped out of college. College didn't work out for me, and I was totally just lost as a person. Like I had grown up my entire life under this false confidence of like just do good in school and everything else will come into
mm.
fit in and will just be laid out in front of you, easy peasy. And it's not that way. So I didn't work out with college, and now my options were basically go out into the workforce and start at the bottom or go into the military. And my entire life I was like, hell no to the military. I'm not that person. Like nothing but love to the soldiers, nothing but respect, but I'm just not that person. And this was the first time where I was like, maybe I'm that person because I don't have any other choice. And so I was going in and out of a lot of different recruiting stations, and I got to a point where I was going to about to sign on the dotted line, and I was going to get what they call MEPS, which is where you go and you get tested. You do your little duck walk, and they do all this stuff to make sure you're actually going to be healthy and fit enough to go through basic training. And the whole drive there on this bus, I started to get into Stone Sour's Come Whatever May album. And I was just, it was something like dark and like unsure and depressed in my mood that I just didn't care what was on. So I just threw on whatever. And I was like, man, I like this band. Like they're kind of heavy, and I like some of the more melodic stuff. This is pretty good. And this was like a couple of weeks out from Audio Secrecy being released. So long story short, the military didn't work out for a number of reasons, but Audio Secrecy comes out. And this is maybe the only album in my life where it literally felt like Corey Taylor was writing to me, where every song, what he's talking about, I was going through. You have Digital Did You Tell, which is about like addiction to technology. And I was in a spot where I was just on the internet all the time. I just didn't know what to do with myself. And so I was, on Facebook and everything else and on YouTube. And I was glued to my screen. You had things like um uh the I think it's the fifth or sixth song on the album. It's called Hesitate. Eighth song on the album, Hesitate. And it's basically about being in a relationship that is toxic, but having the strength to walk away from it. And I was kind of going through that as well. Say You'll Haunt Me, even Mission Statement. Like there was just so many songs in this album where it literally felt like somebody was watching me and just writing a storybook of like, you got to get out of this. You got to get out of this funk. And so not only is it just an album that I love the music on it. It's one of their more commercial kind of albums. So I think that's why fans don't necessarily warm to it as much as some of their heavier stuff and some of their more alternative stuff. But for me, it's almost like it's just otherworldly how specific the lyrics were to everything, literally everything I was going through at the time. So I almost credit this album for getting me out of the funk that I was in and making me like decide where I wanted to go in life and, little steps that eventually led to where I'm at today. So that's the one that I kind of wanted to end it on because it's a great album musically. I love it. I wish they would get back together and get over their shit, but just something about the way that I remember just feeling like almost like Big Brother's watching you. You're listening to the album and you're just like, what the hell, man? Like all of this is me.
That's a very cool one to end on there.
Mm-hmm.
I do love Stone Sour actually. I mean, I much prefer it than Slipknot. I mean, I much prefer it. I can only listen to some Slipknot, and it becomes a bit of a noise to me in the end.
I'm the same way. I'm the same way. There's about 6 or
Yeah.
7 songs by them that I genuinely really love, but something about having 9 members and like 3 percussionists or whatever, like I can take them in small doses. And I would love to see them live just to kind of experience it. I haven't yet, but I'm the same way. Stone Sour is much more my speed of music.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, before I get on to my last one, the House of Golden Bones 1 and 2 is my
yes.
I mean, it's like it almost came together for me at that point with this band. But they're just something special, especially the first one. Really, really good. Thanks, man. Your list is fucking excellent, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay, so this one is maybe the only one you haven't heard of the band. I don't know, you may have done, but for me, I had to choose this. It's the most recent one, obviously, because I'm going in year order. It's 2008. And this band opened up. I don't know if you know much about the Swedish melodic hard rock scene. It's massive at the moment. So you've got a load of bands coming out of Sweden. Sweden seems to be just full up with these hard rock bands that are just amazing. They've sort of got this 80s type influence because they're so melodic, but they're quite heavy at the same time. And it's just like, it seems every day you get a new Swedish band that are excellent, and this band, they're called Eclipse, and they're an amazing band. They're quite heavy as well, but they're really so melodic. And I think they opened up. They were like the band that really started off this scene, if you like. Are You Ready to Rock, which is nowhere near my favorite album from them, but it started me off, and I found this band in 2008. I think it's their third album in. And they're just one of the most consistent bands. And there's so many bands now that not try to emulate them, but just can't quite get to the, how good this band are. And they just create album after album that's just amazing. I've seen them once.
Yeah.
They came to a little pub in London when I lived near London, and I watched them and I was just blown away by them. And actually become quite friendly with the band as well. They send me stuff early and stuff like that. And
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's the cool thing about doing YouTube as well. I mean, I get to talk to some of the people that I've never thought I could talk to, But yeah, Eclipse, they're massive. They've been, since I found them in 2008, like that's it. They're just one of the most amazing bands ever. So check them out if you haven't heard them.
Yeah, I haven't. I'll have to put them on the radar.
Yeah, there's plenty of Swedish bands to find as well. Once you find them, you'll be like, oh, there's this band, there's this band. There's plenty of them that are brilliant, by the way, but Eclipse seems to be at the top of the tier there.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's so cool. You haven't got any like little honorable mentions you want to just mention, have you?
Um, Honestly, it's been weird. The only I don't know if it's stubbornness. I don't know if it's a reflection on the rock scene in America or what, but like since Audio Secrecy, there hasn't really been like an album that has like launched me into loving a band or like really defining an era. But if I had to pick like one really one band or one album that has like really been like holy crap, like this new thing that I've discovered that's really excited me about the state of rock, it's the debut album of Mammoth, Wolfgang Van Halen,
Hmm.
that came out a couple of years ago. um he's one of those guys, and shame on me for thinking this way, where he kind of had like a bit of that nepo baby thing to him, where I'm
Hmm.
like, how good could he be? Like they're just letting him in the band because he's Eddie Van Halen's son. Like he did bass for I think a couple of Tremonti's albums,
Yeah.
and a few things like that. And it's almost laughable how ignorant that statement is, because then you listen to Mammoth and you realize that this guy writes and records the drums, the bass, the guitar, the vocals. And I didn't even realize for the first couple of months that I really liked this album that he was the vocalist. I was
Hmm.
like, whoever this vocalist is that he's got's pretty good. And then I realized he does all of it. And I'm like, holy shit, this guy's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I even saw him live with Alter Bridge, believe it or not, a couple of years ago. And as much as I love Alter Bridge, I thought Mammoth blew them off the stage.
Wow.
And so, like, something about just the way that he had everything arranged and
Hmm.
sounds just like the album vocally, which is very rare to see a singer that can do that. So that's the album or the band here, probably within the last decade, that has made the most impact for me, where I'm like, this is the new thing right here. So he's done two albums now. So he just had his second one come out a couple of months ago. But that's if I was going to give an honorable mention of something more recent, that's one for me.
Very cool. Cheers,
Hmm.
man. Very talented. And I'm sort of almost glad that I think everyone, when he was on the scene, when he was with Van Halen, money for a little while, and then
Yes.
I'm sort of glad he didn't go for that sort of music, you
Yes.
know what I mean, and try and emulate that, pop metal, whatever you want to call it, that rock.
Hmm.
But I'm so glad he went for his own style, and I suppose we should have known being with Tremonti. By the way, do you like the Tremonti albums, by the way? I think they're fantastic as well.
I do. I like him quite a bit.
Mm.
I think I liked his first album the most as like a whole album, because it was very diverse. There was a lot of different flavors in there, where since he's really kind of honed in on more like the progressive metal stuff,
Mm.
which I like quite a bit. But yeah, he's done like what, five albums now, and they've all been
Yeah,
really solid. And it's amazing how those guys can just constantly write,
I know.
record, tour, and bounce around from bands and don't really lose much quality. I mean, I like some of the earlier Alter Bridge more than the later stuff,
Mm.
but there's not a bad Alter Bridge album. I wouldn't even say there's a mediocre Alter Bridge album.
No,
So
no.
they're animals.
They are. They are. One album that I would probably recommend outside of the 10 that I love this band now, you might want to give them a check out, is Spirit Adrift. If you've never heard of them, they're a
Mhm.
doomy sort of band, but really melodic stuff. They blow me away as well. So that's just one
Mhm.
for you. Maybe you want to check that out. But man, it's been such a pleasure
Yeah,
talking
it's
to
been
you.
fun, man. Thank you for the invite.
No, no worries. And of course, I'll leave the link below, like I said at the beginning. But you've got to check out Cody's reviews. They are the best. And I hope you don't mind this. You're the people's movie reviewer. That's how I feel. You know what I mean?
I
They're like your
try to
mate.
be.
It's like
Yeah.
your mate talking about movies. You know what I mean? That's how it feels, and I think that's important. That's why you're growing, in my opinion.
Yeah, what I try to go for, I try to be that relatable person, like you said, where
Mm.
it's like I feel like a friend or even somebody just sitting next to you at the theater, just kind of bullshitting about movies, while also like throughout the 7 years I've been doing it, tried to like educate myself more on the filmmaking process and be a little more well educated in how I bring about
Mm.
arguments and stuff. So I kind of bridge that gap, because a lot of times people tend to have this disengagement from critics because they're looking for all these things that nobody in the general audience is looking
Mm.
for. And you hear like the critics are wrong because they'll bitch about a movie that is so crowd pleasing because it
Mm.
doesn't meet all these things that they learned about in film school. I try to bridge that gap, so I appreciate that it lands for some people.
Oh, you definitely do, man. You definitely
Hmm.
do, mate. Thanks so much for coming
Hmm.
on. perhaps we'll catch up again, talk about music again, or you know,
Oh, I'd love to.
I might even be able to talk to you about movies if you want to invite me on. But oh, it was almost like I could have gone that way. I love movies so much. Did you ever think like where you thought you might go music, or was it always going to be movies?
When I started my channel, and to this day, it still says it in my intro. It says Cody Leach movies, music, games. When I started my channel, I wanted to talk about all three because I love all three. Through the way that YouTube works, it was very clear that it's not advantageous to do that. You kind of have to hone in and niche up a little bit. So I've done music speak sporadically here and there throughout my channel, but yeah, I think it was just because movies were so constant, and I was talking about that more often that really shaped what my channel ultimately became. Uh, but I love taking breaks and talking about music here and there, even if the video like bombs. I don't care. It's for me. It's just fun for me.
No, cool, man. Man, thanks so much for coming on. I know you're a busy man, so appreciate it so much. And cool, love the list, man. All right,
Thank you. Love yours
speak to
too.
you soon. Cheers, man. See you later.